Yeah. It's a different meeting. And little things. Yeah. That was good. And then it's so important. Which version's kind of fun. I don't know which one is the end goal. Yeah, like you. Yeah. So they are down.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. It's what you know, and this note was exactly what I had written down.
Perfect.
And I had about talking to you and saying, I went saying more. You kind of gave out them. I read it. Yeah. He did that stuff. He said, I'm very comfortable. Something to that effect.
Yeah.
How I was written. Yeah, I know. He's a dog.
Perfect springboard.
Yeah.
Yes.
It is.
Yeah. Yes.
No.
Oh, yeah.
In preparation for the weekend.
Yeah, right. It was like every game. We were walking. Great witness. That's right.
I didn't know if you needed me, that's why.
What's water? Would you like some?
So thank you, but yes, Evian,
No, this is not Evian. This is a different one.
very nice. Yeah, that's why your skin is so good. Yeah. Oh. Yes. Yes.
I didn't want to. Sorry.
Okay, was trying to fix.
Can't take a chance.
Oh, okay. Okay, sorry. Oh, yeah.
Yes. Someone in that version of Venmo. Right. I go out to church, and that's me. I'll make it back, but I don't want to commit just in case I'm late.
Yeah.
It's like, how do I say that?
Yeah.
Well, I would love
And
to.
that traffic can be very volatile. You never know what to do.
Just tell me that email, because I did walk through.
Yeah. Well, that's why you know, you gotta be realistic. You don't
Please,
need-
Mark.
Right. That's why I done the last. I don't want to be 30 minutes late. I separated them.
What's your average?
Sugar these?
In Boston?
Like, no added sugars. No.
Yeah, my husband.
Yeah, well, read the other.
You know, out east. Boston, yeah, and further. Windsor to.
Newbury, Newbury, Mass.
Yeah. It was just like, yeah.
We like the selfies, but it's really sad. So you can't, that traffic. I mean, 3 hours, that's not a good day.
It's a lot of getting. Yeah. Oh.
Yes.
How to make appearances.
See, I see. Oh. Yeah.
Some days are.
Want some more? Yeah, I would imagine.
That's when they're frozen. Turning. My parents.
But every kid's different too.
Yeah.
You know. But you're still being very kind. A good thing you're doing.
Maybe it's, she's not wanting to be so hard. She's in college.
Yeah.
She's in her while. I think she's.
Mhm.
And she's almost done.
No.
Because we're not sure of each other's, I mean, it's really hard.
Yeah.
But, you know, the thing is, thankfully, it's their site to, apply for like visas for them about 20 years ago. So finally, after 20 years of waiting, they're on the list and it's application, immigration visa, so. Still smart.
Oh my goodness.
20 years.
And that's crazy.
So our immigration system.
Yep.
It's hard to come here.
My sister.
When you move there.
Very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I did a internship at the US Attorney's Office.
Yeah.
And then one of those days, we were given a tour of US guys. When we got more supervisors and we chatted about it. It's like, it's really is because of our immigration, we give X amount of visas every year, but there are a lot of different, so they allow, let's say, 5,000 to Sweden. But there's no 5,000 Swedes trying to move here every year, and so those allocation goes unused. Well, there's a huge in places like China, Philippines, and so on and so
Yeah.
forth. So
That's interesting. I had no idea.
yeah, that was probably the hard part of the
Yeah.
internship, learning about.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
It's also. Seems like.
It's like
so-
funds should be reallocated and redetermined.
Yeah. I need and, you know,
Mhm.
frequency. Yeah.
Yeah.
He was.
Oh, it's kind of interesting. All the things I learned today.
Well, you know.
Yeah.
So well, I don't know how accurate it is, but I don't quote me on it, but I think, yeah.
That's interesting. And then shine a little bit of a light on some problems that we have. You know, like in our, pretty well, there's a lot of issues.
Yeah. Like, I mean, a little easier. People to immigrate here, then maybe they wouldn't be rushing to live. It's that simple. That's how maybe I take that back. It's not that simple, but I think that will alleviate a lot of the problems we're seeing. Nope.
Yeah.
Now you're conspiracy.
All right, I think we're a minute or two early, but it looks like our key players are here. So Attorney Bogan, you want to have your new witnesses adopt materials, please?
Yes, Ms. Williams, good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Did you prepare or cause to be prepared certain responses to late filed exhibit requests in this proceeding?
Did.
Do you have any changes, corrections, additions to make to those submissions?
I do not.
Is the information true and accurate to the best of your knowledge and belief?
It is.
And do you adopt those submissions as your pre-filed testimony in this proceeding?
I do.
Williams is available, as is the rest of the panel.
Thank you. Ms. McDonald, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, panel. Karima, peer staff. Ms. Williams, let's start with late file exhibits 64 and 74.
Okay.
I'll rotate my questions between.
Okay.
Let me know when you're there.
I'm there.
Okay. All right. 64, right? There's a statement that says the company prioritizes its lien placement on accounts when other collection methods are unavailable. How does the company assess that other collection methods are unavailable?
One of the big examples that I'm referring to here is termination. Termination is not available in the situation of, a landlord who's responsible for tenant water usage, potentially a medical hardship. We would not terminate. So that's where we prioritize our lien filing.
Okay. Attorney Needleman's statement, he claimed that the company doesn't file liens, but files a certificate of continuation of lien using what late file 74 calls the process by which liens are placed. In this reference, is he talking about liens being placed, or is it the certificate of continuation of lien, which is filed on the land records to preserve the lien for 4 years? 14 years.
For 14 years, right? So what he's saying ahead of that sentence is that the company automatically has an unperfected lien against the property. And then he's saying the certificate of continuation of lien for 14 years. That's what you and I think, are thinking about when we're talking about the actual document that we file with the town clerk on the land records.
And so this is the process by which the company follows each time before it places a lien?
Each time we place a lien, we would file that certificate of that's what he's referring to as that official document. He's calling their certificate of continuation of lien, that 14-year lien on the property.
Okay. In late file 74, it seems to indicate that liens are placed on a monthly basis for all accounts over 181 days. However, in our discussion in the evidentiary hearing, the company stated that liens are placed 180 days on $1,000 balance, but does not do so in all circumstances. Did I understand that correctly?
That's correct. So we can place a lien per, our rules and regulations and state statute, which we've gone over, on arrearage 180 days or longer for a balance $1,000 or further. As discussed in late file 64 and kind of our prioritization of liens and our philosophy and the historical development of liens. Just because we can doesn't mean we do.
So someone does exercise some discretion in choosing which accounts to pursue for a lien.
Exactly. So there could be accounts where we are actively in discussion with the customer. They may have this balance, but we've engaged in a payment plan. We may know that they could be applying for assistance. We may there could be a variety of situations where we'd be already speaking with the customer and feeling with good measure, some confidence that a lien is not going to be necessary. You know, as I was discussing earlier in these responses, we understand that there's cost associated with liens and that, you know, for the company and in turn the customer, and a lot of work associated with liens, both on the company's side and for a municipality. And we don't, this is one of our last resort measures. We try to avoid this when at all possible.
Okay. So, but late file 74 asked for the protocols in, based on your statements just now, is there anything in writing to help guide the decision making process before filing the certificates? Because that's not listed in late file 74.
You're right. But we are very involved with Attorney Needleman through the process. This is likely before we even, you know, before we even start much of this, we're speaking to him about kind of the options in front of us and what makes the most sense for both the company and the customer.
So is it that the company then prioritizes oldest past due accounts to address the 1-year deadline for filing the certificate of continuation?
I'm not sure that I could say that for certain, and the reason is because in my, you know, recent memory, a lot of our past due balances now are tied to amounts accrued during COVID. So we're kind of in a period still coming out of that where we're not necessarily business as usual. And we have been through COVID and still, because we know that we're not business as usual, trying to err on the side of more flexibility to the customer.
All right, thank you. Let's talk about the release of lien, the process. The company states it mails the release of lien and letter to the debtor's attorney. What is the process when there's no attorney? That's in late file 74.
Yes, I'm looking at it and I'm trying to think about situations where we have had no attorney. My belief would be that we would mail it to whoever is listed on the lien.
And in those situations, does the company take any steps to make sure that the lien is released?
Oh, yes, and this is another area where we rely on Attorney Needleman to, you know, as part of our partnership with him to make sure that this is all getting done versus doing it in-house.
Okay. So Mr. Needleman is not inside counsel, he is someone or a firm, from a firm the company works with to do these
Correct.
specifically.
Correct. He's an outside attorney who assists us with liens specifically.
All right, thank you. Let's discuss late file 66 and 94. Let me know when you're there, please.
Okay.
All right, so in late file 94, there's one town with maintained fire protection balance over 900,000 from July 2020 through September 21st,
Mhm.
correct?
Yes.
And in the test year, 2022, 2 towns carried significant balances for periods 3 to 7 months, totaling over 510,000.
That's correct.
Did the company collect these past due balances in full from the towns?
Yes.
What steps did the company use to recover these balances?
What steps did we use to motivate the town to
Yes.
regular, enthusiastic communication is, I think, the best umbrella that I could put it on. And I think it's really important to note that a municipality, a customer, any of us, nobody really likes this hanging over them, right? So in most cases, towns are able to work with us in some way. And as I mentioned in LFE 94, this is an uncommon occurrence that is rare, but does happen once in a while.
Did the company explore using liens in this situation?
We didn't. We were in regular contact with town managers and the like. Again, if we're talking with the customer, if there's a dialogue, there's typically not a need to, take a more drastic or, a more serious action like a lien.
All right, thank you. When the company collects these past due balances, is it immediately applied to your uncollectibles?
Yeah, yes.
So other than consistent dialogue, are there any protocols that the company has in place to pursue recovery when in these large amounts,
Specifically for
the towns?
municipalities. Like I said, and as I illustrate in LFE 94, it's pretty uncommon to the point where we haven't really had to make a process specific to this. Most of these, if not all, I'll say all of these municipalities, we're in regular contact with as a result of day-to-day business anyway. If you're looking at something like private fire or other public fire that's listed in LFE 66, that is, those balances are not municipal balances. They are other types of fire accounts, say a, large outdoor shopping center that may have sprinklers or a privately owned hydrant. In that case, we may investigate a lien on that account. But specific to municipalities, we really, it's so uncommon.
Okay. All right, let's go to late file 67 then, please.
Okay.
All right, the company collected $562,138 in late fees in 2023. How does the company use these funds?
I mean, late fees are just part of our overall revenue requirement. So they're, they cover the cost of doing business and financing our investments. It's not much different from collecting on a regular water bill.
Okay. Thank you. Late fee, late file exhibit 71, please.
Okay.
All right, in this response, we were directed to schedule 3.20, page 4, line 65. Correct?
Yes.
And in that line, it's titled Employee Pensions and Benefits.
Oh.
Correct?
Sorry, I'm still catching up.
All right, take your time.
Yeah, it's in 926. I think that heading is a little misleading because there's employee training and 926 overall is a benefits line. So it's labeled as pensions and benefits, but it's that's where we have a certain amount of training recorded.
So the initiatives that you're trying to recover are only training?
I'm not sure if I understand your question.
Okay. Let's take a step back. You're proposing to collect or recover DEI initiatives using account 926.
That's where they reside, yes.
And I'm asking if the initiatives only relate to training for employees.
The initiatives totaling the 8,800.
Yes, that's the company seeking to recover.
Yes, that's correct.
Late file 72, please.
I'm here.
Let's talk about the collaboration with the company and M-Trains. First, is one of the goals of this collaboration is to integrate the training modules to assist the company in making sure their leadership is more diverse?
I would say that our switch from a provider, and we've had a provider for DE&I before. This is just a switch in provider of content. So all of the goals that our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council, which is made up of representatives across our different entities from different backgrounds, they work together on a monthly or bi-monthly basis, depending on the frequency of the meetings over the year, to establish essentially what the goals are for that year. One of those committees is a subcommittee of that DE&IC Council, which is focused on training and onboarding. And that subcommittee in particular has gone through the process of identifying M-Train as our provider, really to provide direct training to our employees on a consistent basis on two really areas that I see. The first is education. So giving employees education on differences from cultural perspective, all those different things, and then skill building. So what are some skills that they can use in the workplace?
So potentially with this collaboration, the company may revise its hiring and retention practices?
We have a quarterly process in Connecticut where we review all of our recruiting processes against our DE&I initiatives. We do that internally from an HR team perspective. One thing that I will point out is this program has a new training that wasn't available to us before, which is hiring skills and essentially restrictions training. Previously, last time I spoke to you, we talked about how we have an individual who's been providing that training. Now we have the availability to a module that provides that training in a consistent basis. That training has things like how to write inclusive job descriptions, generating talent pools, respectful and inclusive interviewing questions, common evaluation practices, and how to onboard effectively. So yes, this provider will enhance our offerings.
The company stated it's procuring training specifically focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as workplace harassment and respect. Can you point in the attached course catalog which trainings were actually procured by?
All of the trainings under those two headings.
All of them?
Yep.
Okay. How will the company measure its success with this collaboration?
This collaboration allows us to put these modules into our learning management system so that we will be able to, at any point in time, go into the system and see participation rates. So participation rates are going to be our primary. There's also an analytical tool in this provider that shows us essentially engagement. So we can have certain modules have certain questions. You know, did you learn something? Are you going to apply the skills that you learned in this lesson in your workplace? And depending on those answers, we'll have some analytics that can guide our effectiveness. We also have two questions in our employee sat survey. One of those questions is, I feel like I belong here. That's one of the areas that we've decided is really important for us from a DEI perspective to look in our employee sat survey. Do people feel like they belong? So that's another measure that, we as a team really look at.
And actions will be taken based on the results of that survey to improve the workplace if the findings support that.
That's correct. We do that every time. We do a mid-year and a year-end employee sat survey, and the results of those survey are reviewed by leadership and also available to all employees. And we have conversations to kind of all levels within the organization about what we heard from the employee sat survey, and essentially a two-way dialogue about what we can do as an employer to be a supportive environment for employees.
Okay. Outside of trying to understand the workplace and the environment, are there specific targets the company is hoping to achieve from the collaboration with M-Train?
We don't have established specific targets that we're trying to obtain outside of participation levels within the training. The goal would be 100% participation in these modules. Our plan is to do monthly modules.
All right, thank you. Can you pull up the attachment to late file 72, please?
Attachment 1 or attachment 2?
Attachment 1. Is it 2? Let me double check.
Yes.
It's the chart, it's the chart that is cited from the data census.gov.
That is correct. We pulled that data directly from the census website.
All right, can you tell me what I'm looking at, please, with the chart?
Yeah, so what you're looking at is EEO classifications was equal employment opportunity classifications around gender and race with a percentage of our workplace. So looking at that first column. So at the time that we pulled this as of December, what was our population percentage breakdown? And then there's the state of Connecticut is the next column. So as a totality, because not all of the towns that we serve had data available. So we pulled in the state of Connecticut so you guys can see that comparison. And then each other column after that is a specific town, community that we serve and what their makeup is locally.
And you said you pulled this data from December 2023?
The end of the year, December 2023 for employees of Connecticut Water.
And for the rest of it, like for the state of Connecticut particularly, because I was unable to find this on the site cited here.
It was in the last census, so it was. I can do that as a read-in because I'm going to have to verify 1 second.
Sure, I'd appreciate that.
Okay, do we want an official read-in or?
Yeah, why don't we designate it as a read-in, and perhaps between now and the end of the next panel, Ms. Longfellow will have identified the information.
Okay, thank you. That's read-in W.
All right, so Ms. Longfellow, how does this help the company plan for its DEI initiatives related to hiring?
And just to confirm, I do have that read-in available. It's from the 2020 census.
2020,
Yeah,
okay,
census, I believe, is done every 10 years.
all right, thank you. Oh, so my question was, how does this help the company plan its DEI initiatives for hiring?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question.
Well, you gave us a chart breaking down the number of the percentage of employees based on race. And in response to this question, to late file 72, we were talking about DEI. So I'm wondering, how does this chart benefits the company in planning its or revising its hiring practices to meet a certain target if that's the intention. But basically, how is this helping the companies in its assessment of hiring?
Yeah, we pull this data on almost a monthly basis as is. So I wouldn't say that this specific data poll gives us any additional insight that changes our perspective since we've done in the past. We have 253 employees as of today that work for us that have a wide variety of background from a lot of different areas, social, economic, education. We've got employees we worked with to get their GED. We've got employees that are first generation college graduates. We have a really wide variety of ability employees with disability. So yeah, this provides one snapshot for us of where we can reach out into our local communities and provide those pipelines of talent. But there's so much more in diversity, and this is just one snapshot of that. So we really look at it in totality. How can we partner with our communities to reach all different types of diversity?
Okay, I appreciate that. What I'm still trying to understand, and why is it necessary to pull this report monthly if you're saying there's wide areas that need to be addressed when I only see race on the chart that's provided here?
This is required by the EEO, Equal Employment Opportunity, through the EEO 1. It's a legal requirement.
And so it doesn't help, it's not assisting the company to make any decisions when it comes to race for the company. Is that a fair characterization?
I'm not sure I fully understand your question.
Based on your statements just now, you said there's a wide variety of DEI initiatives, and the company has hired people with disability, GED. However, in this attachment, I'm only seeing race. And in your response to me, race was not mentioned as one of the variables that is considered in the hiring practices at Connecticut Water.
My list was not meant to be all-inclusive. It was just to say there's a lot of different areas of diversity. This doesn't include just race, it also includes gender. Again, this is based on the EEOC classifications, which was what the request was. You guys didn't ask for additional data cuts, from my understanding. Our process and our philosophy from a recruiting standpoint is to cast as wide of a net as we can. How do we do that? We do that by partnering with our local communities, partner with our tech schools, partner with the high schools, all of those things to get people interested in the water industry. If we can get people in the door, then we select the candidate that has the best skill set for the job.
All right, thank you. Let's move on to late file 73, please.
All set.
Okay. It looks like in 2023, the supplier diversity goal for a percentage of addressable dollars spent was 17% minimum with a 19% target and 21% maximum.
That's correct.
Okay. Why does the company have a maximum?
This is related to variable compensation. So you can, we can definitely in any goal exceed the maximum, but this is related to what the maximum variable compensation threshold would be.
And what was the goal or what was achieved in 2023? From my notes from the evidentiary hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that was 13%.
Let us just have a look. I know a lot of the year-end data is still kind of being collected and audited now for 23.
Yeah, give me a second to pull that.
Okay. Well, while Ms. Longfellow does that, really my question, what I really want to know is, are there any consequences for leadership if the company doesn't achieve these supplier diversity goals?
Well, it's directly related to their variable pay.
So only compensation.
I believe so, but I would submit that compensation is, yes.
Okay. How much of the bonuses or overall compensation is tied to meeting the goal?
We have that percentage.
For just supplier diversity?
Yes.
I thought it might be 15. A second.
I think we did discuss that as part of the record.
5%.
5%, okay. What is,
Excuse me.
thank you. What is the goal for the rate year for supplier diversity?
The goal for 2024?
Yes.
That hasn't been established at this point.
Okay. All right, so let's go back to that 5%. Is that 5% tied to the bonuses or the overall achievement of the goal?
You ask that question one more time.
The 5% that you mentioned that is tied to bonuses for supplier diversity. What is it tied to? This 5%?
This 5%.
Yeah.
Utilizing the 2023
Mhm.
is tied to total spend. So diverse supplier to total spend based on the minimum of 17%, the target of 19%, and the maximum of 21%.
No. All right, let me rephrase it. Let's go back. My question was, how much of it is tied to bonuses for achieving the goal? Your response was 5%. And I'm trying to understand if this 5% is tied to just this part of your bonus, or is it 5% of your entire bonus,
Entire compensation.
entire compensation?
No, it's just 5% of the bonus program.
Okay,
5% of the participants' target award. So each person's target award is going to be different based on their level in the role.
all right. My final question is, what is the company going to do differently in 2024 to ensure it meets the target for supplier diversity?
It's really hard to answer that question because our compensation program hasn't been fully established for the year. So it's hard to say where our targets are going to be and how much of a percentage this is going to be, if at all, related to compensation, variable compensation moving forward.
Are you,
You're on.
We've established a supplier diversity team in-house that is basically resulting from our not achieving the number in 2023. As part of that, we have already joined a council. It's an acronym, and I'm not exactly sure what it is, but the last three letters are Supplier Diversity Council. It's NMSDC. This is a council that we joined and gives us access to the rosters of available suppliers with a supplier diversity criteria. So it gives us access to those suppliers. We are piloting minimum supplier diversity requirements within our capital programs to be determined at this point, but we're looking at all of our specifications for identification and a requirement of having a minimum percentage of supplier diversity spend identified as part of the bidding process as well. So for example, if we had a water main project and we required 8% of the spend to be supplier diversity, you need those contractors, those base contractors would need to identify which components of the unitized bid process would be representative of supplier diversity. Landscaping, traffic services, that type of thing. We are also looking at many of our material suppliers and seeing which of those that are in our approved supplier catalog, material supplier catalog, which of those have the credential of being a diverse supplier and are considering moving our buy towards those suppliers as well. Now, I say all of this in recognition of the fact that we just this week had our second meeting. So we are moving forward with improving what our numbers were in 2023, and we're in the initial steps of that. So the question was, what are we doing to address that?
Yes.
That's what we're doing.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Patla. 2 minutes, all I have.
Thank
panel.
you. Attorney Tanaka.
Thank you. I have a few questions just to follow up on. Just to circle back to late file exhibit 74, my understanding is that that provides the process by which a lien is secured with a certificate. Is that correct?
Yes.
And it wasn't quite sure you fully answered. Is that process followed every time that one of those certificates is filed?
Anytime that we file a lien, we follow this process. What I was trying to explain before is that we try to work with customers to avoid filing liens. So just because a customer has a $1,000 180-day balance does not necessarily mean we will automatically be filing a lien on their property. That's the discretion that I was trying to communicate. We would much rather work with a customer on a payment plan or some kind of arrangement before filing a lien on their property.
Sure, and I understood that there was some discretion involved, but I have some follow-up because I don't understand who actually has that discretion. Who is in charge of deciding on an individual account whether to go forward with filing a certificate?
Well, ultimately, the buck would stop with myself. However, there are a lot of folks involved in the process from start to finish. And if an account reaches these $1,000 and 180-day requirements, hopefully, in many cases, they've spoken with a number of people at the company through the process, and we have an idea of who they are, what they're going through. Can we find another way around this? So it's very collaborative. We do look at accounts on a weekly basis. I don't know that there is a specific designation process that we follow by letter each time, but it's really a matter of looking on account history and talking to various folks throughout the process to see, can we, have we heard anything from this customer? Can we avoid a lien?
So if the buck stops with you, is anyone else at the company other than yourself able to authorize one of these certificates to be filed? In other words, can somebody, in customer service authorize a certificate without going to you first and getting permission?
Well, I would say give me a moment. I want to just think about if there are other officers of the company who could authorize lien. Yes, I was just confirming about that. Technically, other officers of the company could authorize a lien, but as they fall under customer service and revenue services collections, it would typically be me as the leader of that functional area.
Okay, so is it fair to say that almost all liens are cleared by you before they go forward?
That would be fair.
And just to be clear, there's no set protocol that you have written down anywhere that you follow, that you consider. This is just sort of a balancing test, looking at the account, considering the history, considering the context, considering the ability to recover by other means. So there's nothing written down or a formal protocol.
I would say that that might be a simplification of it, but is generally true, and is also generally true for all kinds of collection activities, right? Rigidity is not typically in favor of the customer. So where we can avoid rigidity and work with customers to collect on overdue balances without, legal action, we're going to try to do that first.
Okay, and I appreciate, not wanting to be overly rigid, but nevertheless, there's nothing written down that establishes criteria to look at, a balancing test upon which to reflect, things that should be considered before filing a certificate. There's nothing sort of written down in existence for guidance, even if we're not looking for a specific rule that says, cross off, check A, B, C, we file. There's nothing written down in existence that gives guidance.
Not written. It's verbally discussed often and in partnership with Attorney Needleman as well, but not, it's not, here's the manual on determining a lien.
And so in determining those things that you think of, right, as you go through this is just something that has spontaneously occurred over time, not something developed through any specific process.
I wouldn't say that it spontaneously occurred over time. It occurs as we, in the course of our everyday business, a lot of our decisions in customer service require a fair amount of empathy, give and take, and flexibility. And this is another example of that. So we use our past knowledge for sure, and we use that to inform our future decision-making. So, even though there's not an SOP, a manual, I wouldn't characterize it as spontaneous.
All right. Has there been any training undertaken with respect to unconscious bias or other things that could impact someone's judgment in deciding to place a lien?
Well, our team did participate in the unconscious bias training we talked about during the hearings through our previous DEI education partner, Bias Sync. Our customer service team went through that. And then additionally, as this is a collaborative approach, there's less room for one person to make this decision unilaterally.
Understood, but unconscious bias can occur in a group as well as an individual, correct?
I would agree.
And that training on unconscious bias, when was that instituted?
From our shared recollection, we believe that it was in 2020.
Around that time. I'll just say unconscious bias is a theme that we had when we had our previous provider. And it's something that we include not just as like a quick module, but we've built it into things like leadership development training, where they actually do an activity that kind of really challenges, because sometimes you have the employee that says, well, I'm not biased. And the activity really gets them to recognize that everybody's biased. And recognition, I think, is part of the first step, and then being able to take an approach to respond to that bias. We do it there. We do it on onboarding as well. We talk about our Respect in the Workplace program, which includes recognizing people's differences. And with our new provider, our plan is in March, recognizing bias at work is the module we've decided after Black History Month for this February to celebrate.
And is there any thought into, I don't know how familiar you are with the fact that discretion often is the enemy of equity, depending on who's making the decisions. Obviously, I'm not casting any aspersions on you, but is there any thought to creating some guidance so that there is a double check on the process and that it is being conducted in a fair and unbiased manner each time?
We certainly could document that. That's definitely something that we would be open to doing.
And I just wanted to circle back about the late file exhibit 72, because I wasn't entirely sure of the answer. It sounded like the response was that it's a legal requirement that you pull this data, but you're not actually using it to evaluate your hiring practices.
I don't agree with the premise of that statement. It's one data slice that we use to evaluate our hiring practices, along with a lot of other data slices. This is not just our one and done when it comes to, are we being effective on DE&I?
Okay, so you said you pull this on a monthly basis, is that?
About a monthly basis to track our progress.
Okay, and in tracking that progress, is there any either bonus or, sort of carrot or stick for making progress towards making your hiring practices more representative of the local population?
There is not a incentive per se, outside of just being a good employer and representing the communities that we serve. Like I said, we have 253 employees on board that are representative of the communities that we serve. And a lot of those employees live in those communities. And so it's important to us, not just from an operational perspective, but as a service back to those communities, that we're providing a fair employment opportunity for the community.
And there was a lot of talk about measuring your success in the partnership with M-Train. And I think you talked about measuring participation and measuring engagement. And it sounds like you're asking employees a question about whether they feel like they belong in the company. But as of right now, am I correct that there aren't any other metrics about hiring or retention that you're looking at aside from surveying those that you've hired and retained successfully?
We look at retention metrics and hiring metrics, correct?
Okay, but as to the success of M-Train, is there anything that you're looking to or planning to look to see whether M-Train is actually paying off specifically with respect to the hiring and retention and DEI goals?
I would just say that we've already established our employee satisfaction survey, which measures a lot of different factors, including DE&I. The question that I mentioned was a recent add as we started this training. So I think we've made those adjustments to be able to articulate our progress. And we ask ourselves every year, do we need to adjust our survey or other measures in order to better keep track with the initiatives that we're doing at any given time? So.
Okay, but is it fair to say that those you're surveying as employees are only those that you have successfully hired and retained and not those that you haven't been able to hire or that you haven't been able to retain?
Okay, I see your question. We do have a link on our application that allows applicants to give feedback. So it's through an anonymous survey. So any applicant can give feedback about the process and their experience.
And how is that then tracked and used?
we do a quarterly process in our HR team and our talent team to look at what do we have, what's coming in, what is the market telling us? I'll just say we don't have applicants lined up outside of the door. That's not the market that we're in. So we're doing a lot of active searching that's going out to just this week, we got our talent specialists out at a career fair. So how do we get our employees out there in the local communities, at the chamber conference, at the chambers saying, hey, we're an employer here. What are some opportunities to get in front of the community? That's where we put a lot of our efforts, is the sourcing. We do have another sourcing avenue that we pursued and are continuing to pursue that started, I want to say it's been going on for about 2-3 years. We essentially have our jobs going to diverse job site boards. So with that, we get some analytics to see how many clicks we're getting from these diverse sites.
All right, and just another question about the supplier diversity goals. And I think you mentioned that it's 5% of the bonus, right, is reliant for some employees. Which employees or employee categories have compensation that is tied to that 5% supplier diversity goal?
That's going to be our employees under our LSIP program, which stands for Leadership Council Incentive Plan. So that's where the 5% is coming from.
Okay. And it sounded like there's some uncertainty about what the goal is and whether it's been met. And my question isn't specifically about that, but just more of a simple question. When are your bonuses paid out?
They're paid out around March.
Okay.
And just to follow up on the question, we were able to confirm during this time, we did not meet our minimum for supplier diversity this year.
Okay. And was it that 13%?
It was 17%.
17%. And so you haven't yet set the 2024 goal, is that correct?
That's correct, partly because not all the results for 2023 are fully finalized yet. So we really need to know where we came in 2023 to be able to get the 2024 plan approved and out to participants. So we typically do that in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, so that was going to be my follow-up question. So this is all done, not sort of as most companies do bonuses year end, right, in December, but you have a March timeframe, so you're finishing up the accounting now, and that's why.
Exactly.
Let me just make sure I didn't miss anything. But those bonuses are tied to a calendar year. So you're paid in March for the prior calendar year?
For performance in the calendar year, correct.
All right, I think that's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see Attorney Gouveia, but Attorney Wheel?
Good afternoon. My name is Tom Wheel, stepping in for Attorney Gouveia. I just have a couple of quick questions. On late file 82, it was requesting both information about the collections firm that the company uses, and also requested the scripts or direction provided to the firm by the company. And I noticed that the late file didn't include any of that other information.
Yes, so as I went to pull that information, unfortunately, the communication with LDB was largely with a member of our team who has since retired. and done via phone or also via her email, which is no longer available to us. However, I can say that upon learning that, I thought, well, how do we know that they're doing their job? And so I did look into any complaints that we had received from previous customers who were contacted by the agency, about their practices. And we have not received any complaints in at least the last 2 years. We didn't look back further than that.
Okay. So does the company have a sense of like what the collections agency is communicating with customers, like how they're speaking to them or what they're communicating about?
Well, I would say certainly we set those expectations at the time of hire and since then with primarily that employee that I just mentioned. But we have not had reason to believe that anything was going awry.
Okay. We were particularly interested to know whether your testimony, Ms. Williams, and I think there was testimony during the hearing that reflected this, highlights that customers who are referred to agencies aren't ever subject to wage garnishments, liens, or particularly what we're interested in is reports to credit agencies. And we're just curious to know, to ensure that the company is communicating, that the collections agency is aware of when they're communicating with customers, that customers are getting this information. I guess what I'm getting at is, does the collections agency know that in their communications with customers, they should be clear that those aren't outcomes of the collection process?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I would, if it would make you feel more comfortable, we can reconfirm that, but that's something that would have been set up at the time. And they're also subject to the same Connecticut state laws and rules and regulations.
Okay. Thank you. My only other question is actually a follow-up to a question I asked earlier today from the plan and rate base panel. It's just a similar question. I had spoken to the earlier panel about the statement from Mr. Wazalewski, who's the Vernon Fire Administrator, during the public hearing in Ellington. And we had issued an interrogatory on it asking for information. So Mr. Wazalewski was speaking at the public hearing about canceled projects. He made a statement about that the town had been coordinating with the company to do some projects. Those projects had been canceled without notice. We issued a late file. We asked for a late file on it, and it seemed like the company, the plant panel, wasn't able to identify what projects that might have been pertaining to. But my question for you, and I might have already asked this in the evidentiary hearing, but just as a follow-up with this information today, has the company communicated with Mr. Wazalewski or the Vernon Fire Department to try to clear up what that concern was?
I'd have to confirm with my colleagues, especially in the case of public officials. Our region managers, our engineering team, our service delivery team are much more likely to be in contact with public officials than our customer service staff. In other words, a fire marshal would have a direct line to someone and wouldn't have the need to call the 1-800 number.
Right. Okay. So as of today, are you not sure whether the company has kind of had a discussion with the town of Vernon about what appears to be some confusion of that they're under the impression that something happened and the company's not sure what they're talking about, it seems like?
Well, I would add that regarding the same public forum that evening, the complaint specific from Mr. Wazalewski or Chief Wazalewski that he brought forward was about damage sustained to one of his apparatus during a fire. And we did follow up with Chief after that. It's discussed in late file 76.
Yeah.
But I can read here, the issue was not reported to the company. prior to the public hearing. Fire marshal stated this was the only time this type of incident had occurred. And we reminded the fire marshal to communicate any concerns to us promptly so we can support their efforts and resolve any issues that they may encounter.
Thank you. Yeah, and I did see that response. I think we just didn't issue a specific a similar late file asking about the follow-up specific for the other concern he voiced. So I appreciate knowing that the company did follow up about the damage to the fire truck. So it's my understanding that the issue, because as I read from the transcript earlier in this hearing, Mr. Wazalewski was, expressing a specific concern about canceled projects, and it sounds like from the earlier panel that the company wasn't able to identify internally what those projects, that it sounds like it could have been those 3 WICA projects. And you testified earlier, Mr. Patla, that it's possible that the fire department was informed ahead of time about those projects. My question is just to confirm that right now we're not sure whether the company has followed up with Mr. Wazalewski or the town of Vernon on that specific issue since the public hearing.
That issue is my recollection of that public hearing. That issue was brought forward by the mayor of Vernon, Mayor Champagne, not the fire chief, Chief Wazalewski. We are in constant contact and communication with the town, Mayor Champagne, Town Administrator Procaro, and others through various means. One of those means being design on WICA projects. As Mr. Peeling discussed earlier, one of the initial steps that we would take for design process is to get in touch with the public fire authority, which is different in every town. In this case, Chief Wazalewski, to identify where hydrants would prefer to be located. So he did expend energy to help us in that design process. I will say that they characterize it as a cancellation of a project. It in fact is not a cancellation, it's a postponement of a project. They are projects that are identified and pre-approved through our SAFRA filings. So they, by virtue of the nature of the, I guess in this case, it was the road condition, it was decided to postpone the project, not to cancel. So the work that was put in by the town in identifying, I believe in this case would be fire hydrants. It will be used and utilized going forward through when we finally implement that project.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's my last question for this panel. And actually, and Chairman, the OCC also does not have cross for the next panel. Just letting you know while I'm here.
Thank you. Attorney Dichter.
In response to late file exhibit 80, requested information on the most common complaint at Heritage Village, and the response was basically water quality. And in your response, you say, in each instance, the water was tested and meets all standards. How is the water tested? Where is it tested?
We partner with an independent lab. Mr. Patla has much more the direct knowledge with this than I do, but it's subject to the same water quality testing that we do on a regular basis in accordance with DPH and EPA regulations.
I think your question relates to where is the sample drawn from?
Yes.
Yeah, so it would be any accessible tap within the complainant's residence or premise.
Okay, so it's, for example, it could be from the sink, but it's always within the residence itself?
It is, unless there's not. So for example, if we got a water quality complaint and we can't gain access to that residence when we do dispatch resource to that area, we will utilize whatever access points we have in that given area. For example, a hydrant or a neighbor's outside hose bib, just to take a physical sample and see what the water quality is visually, aesthetically. If it's anything other than what I had mentioned during testimony as a secondary standard, which is taste, odor, color. Then we would take a biological sample, and we would take that from a sink with established protocols by removing screens, filters, and otherwise, to grab that sample and transport to certified laboratory for examination.
Okay, so when you make the statement that it complies with all standards, that's not related to secondary conditions. It is because for taste and water.
When we say meets all standards, it does meet secondary standards as well.
Okay. What are are there secondary standards for taste and water and, I mean, taste and odor?
There are.
Is that set by the Department of Health?
Federal EPA sets the standard. It's monitored by state DPH.
Last question, I probably should ask this to a prior panel, but I think you probably know the answer. For the new manganese treatment plant, will that be treating water from all wells or only from well 2A?
All wells will be congregated and treated at that well.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Attorney Wright.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Attorney Inoue. Thank you. Attorney Wyman or White. Thank you. Commissioner Karen, please.
Hey, Madam Chairman, a few minutes ago, we were talking about liens placed on customers with overdue balances. So as I understand it, I just wanted some clarification. As long as Connecticut Water, or someone in Connecticut Water, generally customer service, is literally in communication with somebody, email, text, on the phone, letters, no proceedings of a lien are pursued. Is that correct?
Largely, yes. We're trying to set up payment plans, work with the customer. There could be, and I can't tell you, looking at the numbers, not on an individual customer basis, but I would imagine that there could be a situation where someone has multiple broken payment plans, and this is then executed as a last resort.
Okay. So generally, a first customer with a overdue balance, again, as long as communication is ongoing with the company, nothing drastic happens, i.e. termination and/or liens on properties.
Yeah, and they would receive a letter of warning too before a lien is placed. Correct.
There's generally a lot of judgment that goes on here based on your the customer service employees' experience, consultations with either supervisors or colleagues.
Yes.
Thank you. We also talked about whether or not the company has any protocols for pursuing liens. And you made the point that rigidity is generally not in best interest of or in favor of the customer. So do you use something like a checklist that, like, we've gone through this, still not getting any resolution, and then the communication seems to have stopped, can't get a hold of the customer, consequently lien either termination and or lien.
Exactly. So yes, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. So if we are, if we think that we're about to place a lien, it's largely a discussion. Have we, and where we would ask ourselves those exact questions. So while they're not written down in an SOP, that is exactly how the conversation goes.
Thank you. I think that's it, Madam Chairman. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Following up on these liens, how many liens does the company have? What percentage of your customer have liens? I guess I have two questions. How many liens do you have, and how many back payments or delinquent payments end up in court?
Oof.
I mean, if you don't have to look, you could do it, get it to us by tomorrow. You don't have to do it right now. You can look at it and just submit it as a.
I can definitely get it to you by tomorrow, but I think it might be in an interrogatory. So if you will give me a moment, let me just search that real quick. So in 2023, we had about 300 active liens.
Okay,
And
Thank you.
in CAE 1, we talk about the number of customers by customer class that have liens placed on their property. Did we update CAE 1 here? Those CAE 1 does have that. I believe that's what
that's
you're
fine.
looking for. But if you'd like more exacts,
No.
happy to do that before tomorrow.
If you can, that's fine.
Yep.
Thank you. That's it.
Thank you. A couple of questions, and I apologize to return to the checklist, but I feel like you gave an answer to my staff that was negative, and then you gave an answer to Commissioner Karen that was positive in terms of whether there is or isn't a checklist. So I'm just like, could you clarify which it is? Do you have a checklist or written SOP or not?
No, what I was saying is we do not have a written SOP. We do not have a checklist, but our conversation before placing a lien would go the way that Commissioner Karen described. These are the things we're discussing before placing a lien.
Okay, so to be clear, the example, a better characterization would be that he provided examples that you would follow, but not necessarily followed in every case because you don't have a written checklist or a written SOP.
I'd say that's fair.
Okay.
I'd say that's fair.
Okay, thank you. All right, I have questions about late file exhibit 48, please. And specifically the exhibit 1, please.
Okay.
Can you help me walk through to make sure I'm understanding how to read this? So if I'm looking at cell row 12, column M, where it says 74,057, is that an apples to apples comparison with the number in cell M22? Like, these are year-end totals, like snapshots at the end of each year? Like they're running balances, but if I'm trying to figure out what the bad debt expense was at the end of 2018, it was 7. Okay, well, let me stop there. Can you tell, am I reading this at all correctly?
So it's entirely monthly activity. So if you want to know what bad debt expense is for a particular period, it's the summation of each of those columns.
So if I wanted to know what the bad debt expense for all of 2018 is, I need to sum up row 12 for columns B through M.
Yes.
Okay. Which I did not do. So give me 1 second to make sure
So for 2018, it should be 339,191.
Okay, did you do that? Because I guess my next my next question was gonna be, I had started with the supposition that it was just a snapshot, like a year-end balance, and I was trying to figure out how to trace the swings and bad debt expense, like pre and post COVID. But that assumed that I was looking at a year-end balance and not the total. So when you do look at the total, is there a demonstrable swing from year to year? I can
I
run.
think you're going to see more the swing. If I think about just accounts receivable in general, where you see the impact of COVID is in the accounts receivable balance more so than the bad debt expense. Because bad debt expense is really more of an accounting entry than anything else, right? It reflects if we take what's on this page, this is the accounts receivable reserve, right? So this says, we have a certain amount of accounts receivable. We apply this percentage and we say, this is how much we think is at risk, and you come up with the reserve. The reserve changes by write-offs and recoveries that actually happen in the course of things. But then bad debt expense essentially is just sort of the balancing point that gets your reserve to where you expect it to be. So what's happening is, because there were no write-offs for an extended period of time, the bad debt expense isn't really showing much. What's showing much is going to be rather the increase in the reserve, the increase in the accounts receivable. That's where you're seeing the impact. I think what we're starting to see over time is the key indicator here of being write-offs. We're starting to see those creep up. So as we built in our proxy for bad debt expense in the revenue requirement, a lot of times you'll take an average, what has it been for the last 5 years? We had a clear uptick. So we're using the test year as the basis for that. And, there's even risk at that. But it was clear that, we're starting to see the write-offs coming through now. But it takes a while because we had to start being able to shut people off for those write-offs to start occurring.
Right. Okay. So that's helpful. So, the bad debt reconcile in the next rate case, is that part of the proposal?
Is it a we have not requested it. I mean, as part of 2003, is it 2003-15? Is that the docket?
COVID docket.
There are monthly filings that reconcile the amount of bad debt expense in rates versus what we're actually incurring. So I've always viewed that as sort of the mechanism if we were to do something, because we're still reporting on that monthly. So to the extent that this takes off, I viewed that as the vehicle by which we would essentially raise our hand and say, can we, we would start deferring that differential. I think other utilities have deferred based on that docket, but we have not. But I think that is the placeholder for it.
Okay, so the placeholder is but that's a placeholder for the risk to the company, or the risk to the customer, if rather than assuming the average of some number of years for the bad debt expense, you've just taken the test year. In your mind, how are we accommodating for the risk to the customer?
I think it's accommodated sort of in the larger picture, in terms of, the earnings tests that we put in place. So
I'm sorry, the what test?
Earnings tests. So it's not individually a reconciliation of, what's built into rates for bad debt, but overall in terms of, are we over earning? In that case, we'd be sharing.
Okay.
But nothing specific to the one item.
Thank you. A couple of questions about late payment charges, which I think also are alluded to in late file exhibit 48. But as a precursor, Ms. Williams, can you please remind me, can an individual customer service representative waive an LPC, a late payment charge, excuse me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Are there any qualifiers on when they can waive the late payment charge?
In practice, we remove them pretty regularly.
For all types of customers, or is there a
Yes.
restriction to financial hardship?
All types of customers.
Regularly, meaning like if the customer asks, or is this something that a CSR is empowered to do just as a way to de-escalate the call, or what is?
I would say both. If the customer asks, we certainly can. And especially because if we're at the point where we're having that conversation with the customer, similar to what I was talking about before, when we are able to communicate with the customer, we're going to take the leeway that we can to make it as easy for them as possible. So if that means, I can't pay today, but I can pay next week, can you remove my late payment charge? Yes.
Thank you. So similar to the discussion that we were having about liens, is there a checklist or written document that speaks to the discretion around late payment charge removal?
There's not a specific document, but customer service representatives are coached that they can remove them in the event of a customer request or in the need for de-escalation. If something's requiring de-escalation, it's usually risen above the first person that the customer is speaking to and is at the lead supervisor, manager, or director level.
Thank you. And I have questions that continue with late payment charge. I think they're a little bit more like revenue requirement questions, but I don't think that they're appropriate for Mr. Therian. So if I could just ask, and if you need to defer me, please. But the question is there an assumption about late payment charge revenue baked into the revenue requirement?
There should be, yes. So within the rate design that Mr. Therian will present, whatever compliance filing, there is an assumption that I want to say roughly $800,000 or $900,000 comes from late payment fee revenue.
Okay, so does that mean that when the company files its annual reconciling adjustment mechanism or this decoupling mechanism, that if that late payment charge revenue was not realized, that would be part of the request for decoupling revenue?
It's inherent in the numbers, right? Because the decoupling looks at total revenues and it doesn't break it down into the pieces. But all else being equal, if we missed revenues by $100,000 and it was solely attributable to late payment fees, it would spark the charge, yes.
Thank you. Did the company consider excluding late payment charges from the calculation of revenues for their revenue decoupling mechanism?
We didn't, only because I think we're following some pretty explicit guidance on the decoupling in terms of what's included and what's not. There was, as it was established, in attempting to make it a sort of a simplistic method, it was decided that all revenues would be part of the decoupling. So we've been following that since the establishment of it. Ooh, I can't even remember what year that was, but it's for the last several years.
Okay, thank you. When Mr. Therian comes up, could somebody point me to the schedule reference for the exact quantity of revenues assumed for the late payment charges? And next.
Yeah, I think we have a couple responses that point out the historical numbers. So we have that, but we can certainly find that in
Thank you.
between now and then.
Thank you. I'm looking for the test year amount specifically. Okay, thank you. And final question, not about late payment charges. Earlier, on a different panel, I was asking a question about public facing scorecards. And Ms. Williams, I just want to confirm whether there was anything that your colleagues may have left out in terms of whether there are any public facing scorecards that the company may currently distribute either through mailings or website or anything such as that.
Right, so scorecard definition being undefined, there are certainly metrics that we communicate to our customers and the general public on a regular basis. One of those is our customer satisfaction index. That's typically published twice a year on bill inserts or put in a customer email. It does also appear in our annual sustainability report. I think that my colleagues mentioned water loss and some of the items related to greenhouse gas emissions reductions as being things that we report annually also in that sustainability report. I'm trying to think if there are any that we're missing, but we certainly would be open to transparently publishing metrics of that sort.
Thank you. Yeah, fair point. I didn't define scorecard. Would your answer change if I refine that to say, something where, both the target was disclosed along with the, actual results?
Sure, I see no issue.
Okay, thank you. I believe those are all my questions. Just triple check here. Yes, so, with the, one hanging out for the next panel, please.
I just looked up OCC 373, Part B, talks about the late fee revenues for 22, 23. And the test year number was $904,012.06.
Thank you. All right, no questions hanging out then. So Attorney Bogan, any redirect? No. Okay.
None.
Very good, thank you. In that case, we will move to our final panel. So I'll invite both the witness and if the deep team could please approach, you will be first up for cross. And Attorney Bogan, do you need a break? I can't remember exactly.
No.
Nope, okay.
Thank you.
Not, I'm sorry, not you specifically, but does your team need a?
No, we're good.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we'll just get started.
Oh, nope.
Oh, not yet. I will not get started.
We'll have to have Mr. Therian adopt any late files first, I think.
Piggybacking.
Attorney Bogan, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Therian. Did you prepare or cause to be prepared or oversee the preparation of certain late file exhibits submitted in this proceeding?
Yes, I did.
Have any changes, corrections, additions to make to that information?
No, I do not.
Is it true and accurate to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes,
And with that, do you adopt it as your testimony in this proceeding?
I do.
Therian and the panel are available.
Thank you, Mr. Annis.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you for everyone being afternoon. I got the lovely job of being the last named cross examiner, so I'm keeping everyone from going home this afternoon. So I will try to be quick. We have just a few very quick questions, all focused on late file 86, mostly attachment 2 as well. The first question is a clarification question. I probably said it earlier, but I want to make sure we understood it correctly. The categories, we had 0 kilogallons, 15,000 kilogallons. And those numbers, are those full ranges? So the 0 is 0 to 15, the 15 is 15 to 17. Is that a correct understanding?
Close. It works a little bit backwards. 0 is 0. So 15K is 1 gallon, 1,000, 1 gallon up to 15,000 gallons.
Okay, so.
And then the next block, if you will, is 15,001 up to 18,000.
And you categorize that one as 18,000.
Correct.
Okay,
So it's the increment as you move forward.
understood. Which make the, okay, I'd make sure I can think through how that means or affects my questions. I assume the other way. So I guess looking at late file 86, there seems to be a big drop off at the 15,000 kilogallon usage category. And then, so this from the data there, do you think is it a fair assumption to say that the 15,000 category, I think above that is above the norm discretionary usage?
I think that's a fair assumption. We looked at this extensively between 15,000 and 18,000 in Connecticut Water's last rate case in 2020. I believe it was late file 14 and late file 15 in that proceeding. And there was some concern that there could potentially be some multifamily dwellings within the 15 to 18,000 breakpoint. So erring on the side of caution, the breakpoint established in the last case for step 1 to step 2 is 18,000 gallons per quarter. And I continue to think that that's the right breakpoint.
Okay, have you had any further knowledge of the multifamily housing? I know there was concern in 2020. Is there any more knowledge at this point in time on that? Or that still remains the same kind of concern? We don't know.
It's the same concern. I think that's kind of twofold. One, to identify, verify, and then continue to track multifamily 1-metered home is administratively challenging. And to remove them, if we were to identify, verify, and then continually track those, to remove them into their own rate code would also cause a pretty significant amount of administrative work.
Understood. Thank you. I guess, Mr. Therian preemptively answered my next question, which was, does the company, given that we're seeing that threat, that significant break at the 15,000, does the company not support going to tier 2, moving that threshold from the 18,000 to the 15,000 threshold category?
Through a series of discovery questions through the parties, as well as a late file where we compared usage at various breakpoints, I haven't seen any evidence to make me think that we should change to a lower breakpoint. Therefore, I think 18,000 remains my recommendation.
Okay, so I'm not sure I'm not confused by my misinterpretation before. So if you're using the 15,001 gallon, that is in the tier 1, and the 18,001 gallon is in tier 2?
No, it's up to 18,000 gallons is tier 1. Anything over 18,000 now becomes tier 2.
I think that's what I tried to say.
Okay.
18,001 gallon is the first gallon that has $2 on it.
Well, today it's $1.
In the proposal.
In the proposal will be $2, correct.
Okay. And I guess following up on this question, understanding that the company's position is not to support it, but understanding if we're achieving conservation goals in part with this step, with these tiered goals, is it fair to say that the lower usage customers who go from the 15,000 to 18,000 in that third quarter are probably more price responsive than those that go well over the 18,000 category?
I believe there's some confusion about 15,000. That's not really, frankly, a relevant breakpoint here. We currently have an 18,000 gallon breakpoint. We're proposing to maintain that 18,000 gallon breakpoint. Therefore, all gallons consumed less than 18,000 gallons per quarter are priced at the same per gallon rate.
Understood. I was talking about the customer class. So looking at the bills, and we graphed out the bills, the 15,000 has the overwhelmingly large portion of the bills. Is that correct?
The greatest population of bills are between 1 gallon and 15,000 gallons per quarter.
Right. And the only quarter that we see in the numbers you put in LFE 86 was the shift really occurs from that category to the other categories in Q3. There is one outlier on that one, but that is generally where we're seeing that big shift in the seasonal usage. It comes out of that 15,000 and goes into the larger ones after that, and it's spaced out amongst the larger one. Is that a fair characterization?
The third quarter clearly exhibits the highest amount of bills that go over the threshold, correct, into tier 2.
Right,
And or to your point, over 15,000 as well.
Right. So it's saying, is it fair to say that a large portion of the usage above 15,000 is occurring in Q3?
Yes.
And would you agree that those that are going from the 15 to the 18, but not the ones above, are using a little bit extra water in the Q3? That's probably irrigation, and it's just not a very large amount of irrigation.
I would say that's probably Just from experience, I would agree with that statement.
And do you agree that, that generally lower income individuals are more price responsive than upper income customers?
We did not test that in this case.
Are you or any of the panel aware of any research that indicates that that is the case?
Generally, through econometrics, when one looks at independent variables that may influence a dependent variable, price and income are classic independent variables that are considered. That's a technical way of saying, yes, I'm familiar with research that says how much people earn matters.
I appreciate it. All right, does the company is using the tier 2 and the tier 3 for conservation as being one of the key motivating factors? I think I asked this last time and I'll reiterate it now.
Definitely, yes.
But the company in its revenue requirements didn't really assume there is a large change in usage because of the tiered pricing.
No adjustment was made. That's for two reasons. One, we just had a discussion about the RAM, that the RAM would pick up any, and it's really intended to do that, is to recover revenues that would have been billed absent conservation. And then number two, as I just mentioned, we did not perform any econometric modeling in this proceeding. If we had, that would have been the tool that I would have used to attempt to quantify that impact. But absent the econometrics, I have no way of estimating that amount.
But the company is expecting that there would be a reduction in usage in the upper levels and they'll just pick it back up in the RAM.
Absolutely. That's why, in fact, during our, and I've referred to this several times during our workshop, we talked about, price signals and whether or not there was a meaningful impact from the dollar premium in current rates, and then the desire to continue to promote conservation through pricing. And that led to the proposal that we put in front of you.
Thank you. There's a very big gap between the $2 and then the $6 in tier 3. Can you reiterate the thinking behind that large jump? And this is where I'm heading with that question is there a consideration of maybe shifting some of that to the tier 2 up a little bit higher and tier 3 down a little bit?
One moment, please. I want to refer to a response of a late file, which I think will be instructive. I'm looking at late file 89, attachment 1. And in this late file, the actual rates for each tier at the company's proposal, as well as 2 alternate scenarios requested in RRU 542 are compared here. And I bring this up because it's important to understand, and I'll use Connecticut Water Company as my basis for this point, that the first tier is $13.50 per 1,000 gallons. So that's a substantial number. To add $2 to that, we're going from $13.51 to $15.51. So it's a price signal, but it's not like double, okay? It's $2 over a $13 base. And then the last tier, as we propose, is $21.51, which is a $8 premium over the base or a $6 premium over tier 2. We would expect only the highest discretionary users on a 5/8 or 3/4 inch service to be in that category. And we're really trying to send a significant price signal that that's a no-no. I don't know how else to put it, but you really don't want to consume water over that break point. So to answer your question, we think it's a reasonable proposal. We have decided that we're sticking with that even after going through this evidentiary process.
Understood. I guess, would the company object to shifting a little stronger price signal at tier 2? And less less of a no-no signal at tier 3? Does it, and if so, just kind of explain the thinking.
After our brief conference, thank you for your patience. We did have a consensus that, yes, we would object to that distribution, being that at that lower level, as discussed before, we still have some multifamily, larger family and a single family residence. And at, you know, we're looking to create more meaningful conservation at those large usages for lawn irrigation, not, you know, somebody who's washing their car and watering their vegetable garden and letting the kids run through the sprinkler a couple times in the summer.
Understood. I appreciate the answer and I appreciate the rationale. And so that gets at my core questions. And there was just one other question, which is just something that's jumped out at me in the breakout of the bills you gave me. And that was the category using the 27,000 kilogallon category. That one seemed very non-seasonal, and it was the only one that was very much non-seasonal. I couldn't explain it, and I was just hoping you could.
Sure. It's just because the increment from the previous block is 3 times the size. So we're marching along saying, oh, well, we're going from 15 to 18 to 27, then to 30, 33. So the increment is 3 for all of the other blocks, and this one is 9. So it's just capturing more because the increment's larger.
That is a very good explanation, and I'm disappointed that I didn't see that. So thank you very much, and I appreciate your time. Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you. All set. Very good. Thank you. All right, peer staff, Mr. Skarzinski, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, panel, Mr. Therian. Most of my questions just to frame it are clarification on a couple of the late files, but in light of the discussion, I just have one question. In rate design consideration for usage rates, just want to make sure I understand it. Is it fair to say that there's a balancing of different interests in setting usage rates? There's the conservation aspect that was just good discussion on, and also a nod, if you would, towards trying to balance at the lowest price point, the tier one usage, a decent amount of volume to consider the residential customers, maybe a family of four. We mentioned multi-dwelling. So is that sort of this balancing act or competing interests that formulate a price point and a threshold for usage at tier one?
Well, I think you described it well. This is more of the art portion of rate design than science. There's some level of trial and error and successive approximation that we make. And what I mean by that is last case was the first time we introduced a second tier. This is our opportunity to see how that worked out. As it turns out, it didn't move the needle much. So we're making a proposal to significantly increase these rates. We've analyzed the data that we've had. We didn't see anything that made us want to change the usage breakpoint, but it did make us want to change the price. Next time Connecticut Water comes in for a rate case, we'll have an opportunity to see how this price signal went.
Okay, and a couple follow-ups to that before we move to the clarification piece is, so the 18,000 threshold, just focusing in on that, there was discussion about the 15,000 versus 18,000. Is it fair to say that the 18,000, in your opinion, is an appropriate threshold that balances those two needs we just talked about, competing interests?
Yes, and I would say it errs on the side of being conservative with the customer data that the company has available to it, specifically with multifamily homes and large single-family residences. So setting that at 18,000 is a more conservative approach than setting it at 15,000.
Okay, and we're going to work our way up the tiers for a minute here. So we talked about tier one and tier two. Just to reiterate, so currently the inclining block rate that was implemented was for residential, and it was at the present rates are at $1 above the tier one price points, right? After the 18,000 mark, it's $1 more per 1,000 gallons beyond 18,000 at this point, correct? Than the tier one price.
At current rates, that's correct.
Okay, and is it fair to say that the findings were, I know there was a couple of questions that you answered, that in your judgment, it hasn't really been effective as a conservation measure based on a comparison of 2019 and 2022 usage. Is that fair?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and so under the proposed rate though, at tier two, there's an increase from $1, if I understand it right, from a dollar beyond the tier one rates to $2. So there is already an up in the ante, if you would, for tier two. Is that correct?
Yes, and again, I'll just reiterate the point that we're coming off of a $13.50 tier one rate. So adding $2 to that.
Okay.
It's not a doubling it's not a doubling of the rate. It's increasing the rate by $2 versus $1 with the idea that maybe a $2 differential between block two and the base block would make a difference.
Okay, thank you. And then finally hitting tier three, under your proposal, it's at a 30,000 gallon threshold, correct? Before it goes to that tier three, right? And just kind of lead into really my core questions that I have today. We asked you to do a couple of different looks in the late files. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. If you could go to LFE 87 attachment 1, please. And I think the best way to do this, and I know it's late in the day, is just I want to walk through the pages. And if I ask, I just let me know if I'm confirming. I want to understand what the setup is here a little bit. So I'm looking at pages 1 and 2 of LFE 87. And I think what you're doing there is just showing that at the present rates, there's two blocks. There's the usage block percentages, and then there's the annual number of bills by rate tier. Is that correct? Okay, and I think we can knock off 1 and 2 pages 1 and 2 very quickly. This is showing the current rates, and because there's no tier 3 rate, the percentages would be the same for regardless of the threshold, meaning the 30,000, 33, or 36,000 threshold. Is that right?
It wouldn't matter, right? It's the same rate.
And I'm going to use rounding, just take the liberty of it. So at the present rates, the usage is roughly 80% rounded up to tier one and roughly 20% tier two for usage. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and then generously rounding on number of bills, roughly, well, I'll just say 84.5% roughly, 85 and 15%.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. So that explains the first two pages. Great. Okay, now moving into pages 3 and 4. Is it correct to say this is where you're trying to answer what we asked you by looking at different thresholds? And on page 3, you're starting out at the 36,000 threshold and showing the usage, the first two boxes going top down, the usage percentages at 36,000 and the number of bills for 36,000. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And then going below that to the last box, you transition to the 33,000 and show the usage on bottom of page 3. And at the top of first box on page 4, the number of bills at the 33,000, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Are the last two boxes sort of redundant at the 36,000? I'm just really trying to understand it. There's really no hidden thing here. I'm just trying to understand the last two boxes. I think they're repetitive. I just want to make sure that I understand your filing completely.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So we did 36, 33, and then 36 again. I don't know why that happened. I don't know if it was intended to be a different breakpoint there. I apologize.
No, not at all. That's
Either that or I think the question was 33 and 36. So I don't know. I duplicated it. We could just ignore it.
and that's fine. Thank you. Okay. That's all I had on that one.
I apologize for that.
No, not at all. And then, well, just on the last page, and that just shows the breakouts by division, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thanks. Okay, I know you touched on this with Mr. Ames a few minutes ago. If you could turn to LFE 89, the attachment, the one-page attachment, please.
I have that.
Okay. And is it correct to say you're showing 4 looks that incorporates my question in the first round of hearings? The first is you're showing the present rates by division, and then the company's proposed rates in the second grouping. And then it's labeled RRU 542A, you're attempting to show the usage rate design for the 3 tiers at a $4 price point instead of the $4 tier 3 price point instead of a $6 premium as proposed by the company. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And then in the last box, 542B, you're doing the same thing, but at the $8 price point. So we sort of asked for a little bit over, a little bit under, and that's what you've attempted to do, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you. And is it fair to say that in general terms, as part of the overall concept of designing the rates of the usage, that at the $4 price point, I'm not going to go into the weeds and look at every division because it's kind of self-explanatory, but is it fair to say that when I look at it, the $4 price point is less than the tier 3 proposal, and therefore you have to look for the revenues at the usage rates in the other tiers, possibly like tier 1 and tier 2, meaning those might be increase depending on the division than the company's proposed rate. Is that correct?
Yes, and that's evidenced by looking at, and again, I'll look at the Connecticut Water Division because it's the largest and it's the one we've been talking about. At proposed, tier 1 is $13.51. Okay, if we were to decrease the tier 3 premium, that rate has to go up. And the reason for that is at the end of the day, rates must collect the revenue requirement. So if you're not going to collect it as much in that last tier, you have to get it from somewhere else. So my assumption was I'm going to change that tier 1 block rate And the computer does the goal seeking to make sure I get to zero, and these are the resulting rates. And then that same process would occur if you had an $8 premium. Now you could actually reduce the tier 1 rate compared to the proposal because you're collecting even more dollars in that third tier.
You anticipated my next question, so that saves us some time. That's exactly what I was going to ask. Is it just a couple more, if you would? During the hearings, we had a discussion about just the rate design in general, and that depending on where the starting price points were for the usage rates by division, that allows you, that's a strong consideration why the price points, it's not perfect rate consolidation, right? It's like you have to look at the starting point, and I'll hone in on this. So I noticed that in the Avon Water Company, so with that, in the exhibit on the $4 or the $8 tier 3, you were able to, in that division, is it fair to say, is it correct to say that you were able to retain the proposed usage rates for tiers 1 and tier 2? Just want to understand it.
Yes, that would be one potential outcome. And what I mean by that is when we developed our proposal, we looked at everything that we talked about. We looked at relationship to other divisions. We looked at relationship to cost of service ratios. And we meticulously went division by division. For purposes of RRU 542, frankly, I didn't have the time to invest in that level of judgment. So I simply took a very mathematical approach and chose to use the Connecticut Water Division Tier 1 rate as my balancing cell.
Okay.
That's the mechanics of it. To answer your direct question, could I design rates that retained the same base rate for other divisions? Yes, and it's evidenced here.
Okay, thank you. General question. The way we've asked the question was focused in on usage rates. Underlying that, you have the fixed charges, which was not part of this question, to be fair. But underlying that, with what I'm looking at, would there have been, at the two looks that we asked for, the 4 and 8, would there be changes in the fixed rate on them? Did you consider that? And I appreciate what you just said. And I realize in a compressed time frame, you're trying to give the look. I totally understand that.
The short answer is no, but let me expand on it if I could. That in this particular proceeding, we're continuing efforts on rate consolidation. And the order of rate consolidation, as expressed in the previous final decision, and frankly, I think it makes a lot of sense, is to try to get the fixed charges consolidated first. And then these variable charges will be the last thing that we get consistent across all divisions.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything? All right. Unless Attorney Wheel has changed his mind, then Attorney Dichter. Question?
Good afternoon. I just want to make sure I understand. Could you turn to late file exhibit 90? And this, I believe, relates to the RAP program cost and how it's recovered from the customers. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And you've estimated roughly $2.6 million of cost to the company of the low-income assistance program in the rate year.
That's correct.
Now, here you show how you then allocated that $2.6 million solely to residential customers. Is that right?
That's correct.
And this LFE 90 shows how you allocated it among the divisions of the company?
That's correct.
And you say it's based on head count. Is that head count in each division of residential customers? It's distributed based on the number of tests your customers as follows.
Okay, I'm sorry. I heard head count and
I did say head count, my
Okay,
mistake.
no, that's fine. Yes, based on customers,
Is that simply residential customers? Does that include all customers of the division?
residential customers.
And so for example, for Avon, if Avon customers, residential customers represented 5% of the company's total customers, they would be allocated 5% of the $2.6 billion. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, this is an estimate, and so of course there'll be a reconciliation at some point through the RAM. As I understand that?
Your understanding is correct.
And will the RAM then, if it turns out to be $2 million, return $600,000 only to residential customers?
No, it's the RAM applies to all customers.
So there's a mismatch between who's incurring the cost of the RAP program and who may ultimately recoup the adjustments to the program. Could go the other way, I assume.
The answer is yes, and it could go the other way. And that's the importance of having your best estimate imputed into base rates.
Now, using customer count is one methodology for allocating the costs of the RAP program among divisions. It itself doesn't represent what one would expect to actually be experienced, does it?
I think I need your help a little bit more on your question.
That's fair enough. For example, for Avon is allocated $128,000. Do you expect that that is the exact amount that Avon will have low coverage? Excuse me, let me restate that. Is that the exact amount that Avon customers will utilize of the RAP program?
No, and it's not unlike any other allocator in a cost of service model. You know, you pick your best representative allocator to allocate costs, but of course the cost incurred would be different from that.
The company has some experience from the last rate case on RAP?
It was a different percentage and a different program. I believe it was 15% of all of the total bill. It was also allocated in the cost of service model using the same methodology.
Right. But then the actual experience of where customers are located that utilize our program was not factored into your analysis here. Is that correct?
It was not factored into this analysis. That's correct.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. Attorney Wright. Attorney Wyman or White?
Hey, Attorney Wright, allow me to represent the Divine Cross.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, Chris Parent from EOE. I really just have one question that I'm having trouble reconciling. The cross that just occurred with regards to late file 90 references the $2.6 million discount amount. The response to late file 77 shows the amount as roughly 630,000. I'm just having trouble reconciling the two.
Sure, understandably so. In the rebuttal testimony that I filed, it explains that differential. And basically it comes down to one major factor, is the assumption for the customer participation. And during the course of this proceeding, that the number of participating customers, the estimated number of participating customers was reduced down. So that reduction in the number of participating customers, when you do the math, ends up being an imputation of $600,000 instead of 2.6 million.
So then late file 90, when it requested, referred to theory and direct testimony, page 29, and provide the mathematical calculations, the 2.6 is the outdated amount that is estimated by the company at present.
That's correct.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner Karen. Mr. Vice Chairman. Okay, thank you. I also have a question on late file exhibit 90, please. Let me back up. Is it fair to characterize one of the objectives, if not the objective of LIRAP, being to reduce uncollectibles or arrearages?
That is one of the considerations. I think the primary consideration is to help low-income customers with their overall energy affordability.
Thank you. Are uncollectibles socialized by within the rate class, or are they put into one bucket and then spread out by rate to all customers?
I'll speak from the allocated cost of service model. That is, the cost of bad debt is allocated based on number of customers in each rate class.
Thank you. All right. Last question, Mr. Dixon. I know you thought you were off the hook for that question about late payment charges, but cannot figure out what schedule the late payment charge revenue shows up in.
So it's in the total operating revenue number. So C3.1, which is essentially your starting point. You know, that's your authorized revenues at current rates. It's a combination of revenues authorized in the last case plus current WICAs. There is an amount of late fee revenue in there. However, as we get to an ultimate revenue requirement, when Mr. Therian does the rate design as part of the compliance filing, I believe what he will do is he'll take into consideration the late fees and other revenues from the test year, and that's almost the first offset to the revenue requirement. I'll say I need to get $100 million. I'm getting $1 million from late fees, therefore I got to get 99 everywhere else, and he'll start doing his allocations.
Okay.
So it'll be evident in the rate design that we present in the compliance filing effectively.
Okay, so I apologize, I think it was 900,000. The amount that was in OCC is baked into the total operating revenue that's visible on Schedule C 3.1.
Yes.
Okay.
And I, as Mr. Therian came up, I validated with him that what he used in the current rate design is the test year value.
The test year value being the 900.
Yes.
Correct.
All right, thank you. That is it for me. Attorney Bogan, any redirect? Okay. That's it. Thank you very much. We are just going to go through some administrative matters. So if any party or intervener has an administrative matter to flag, that needs to be done so now. I see Attorney Wheel.
Thank you. Yeah, the authority recently allowed our motions to allow our late filed hearing exhibits to be accepted via affidavits. I just wanted to know if those should be filed as correspondence, or I'm just not sure the mechanism that they should be filed as in the docket.
Correspondence, please.
Okay, thank you.
unless I'm about to be corrected. 1 second. Yes, okay, correspondence will do. So, 2 administrative matters for me. I just want to recap. I think we had 1 supplement to a late file requested, a supplement to late file exhibit 21. And then just a clarification, Mr. Dixon, we had an exchange earlier about, and you know what, I can't even remember what it was. I just heard that I was right and that you forgot something. So do you planning to supplement late file exhibit 1 with that?
It seemed, I believe there was an adjustment for non-Connecticut purchasing card charges of about $9,000.
Yes.
It's essentially just going to reduce the number. I mean, I can update the whole model, but you could just take what I have and
And subtract it.
$9,000. So
Okay, very good. Thank you. Okay, so we have late file exhibit 21 supplement. The evidentiary record, I will hold it open for that. It was scheduled to close tomorrow at 4 p.m. To coincide with the close of the late file exhibit hearing. Obviously, we are not going to reconvene tomorrow. We're through the agenda, so the hearing tomorrow will be canceled. But we will hold open the evidentiary record at this point for the sole purpose of receiving the supplement to late file exhibit 21. The final page of the agenda does, I'm sorry, was it? No, okay, sorry. The final page of the agenda does have a list of the next events from the briefs down to the final decision date. So I will just solicit any final closing administrative matters. Right, I'm seeing none. In that case, we have been efficient. So I thank everybody for that. Hearing tomorrow is canceled, and thank you. We are done.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.